The Quarantine Sessions Podcast with J. Cole.
Hey,
Hi, Veronika.
hi Jay.
Thanks for joining me here.
Yeah, my
We,
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
yeah, we met the first time in Mexico at the Crypto Psychedelic Conference, which was a really interesting event in Tulum. Um, yeah, how was your experience at that conference?
Yeah, it was great. It was, of course, beautiful to be in Tulum, but it's kind of just like so much has happened since then. I think it's about like 3 years ago, and just thinking
Hmm.
about what like happened in the psychedelic field, and really, it's been a really good conference, meeting a lot of interesting people, and yeah, that's where we briefly met, and um, yeah, it was a really good experience.
Yeah, it was
Uh,
amazing. I'm really curious to hear about what has happened in the field of psychedelics since then that you think is really significant. Because I kind of catch news secondhand just through the internet, but I'm not as in it as you are as somebody who's really working in the field professionally.
yeah, so I was thinking that time we were just starting a site in San Francisco for the MDMA assisted psychotherapy clinical trials for the treatment of PTSD, and we as well were starting a clinic that I work at, Polaris Insight Center, which provides ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And, over the last 3 years, there has been, huge improvement in kind of and movement in the clinical trials that moved from phase 2 to phase 3. Now we're in the middle of phase 3, which is towards rescheduling MDMA, which is super exciting, and so many new opportunities in the field. So much more people interested in everything, in research, in training to be psychedelic therapists, people getting together thinking about starting societies or and associations for therapists, and a lot of clinics that are opening right now offering ketamine assisted psychotherapy, but planning to offer MDMA assisted psychotherapy, psilocybin assisted psychotherapy as these become legally available. So it's a really exciting time.
Wow, yeah,
And
incredible. And that makes me really happy and really excited because of the impact that psychedelics have had on my own life and on my own healing process, and to experience firsthand their effectiveness, and also to see it have such a transformational effect on the lives of so many people that I've come into contact with. For me, it's really insane that they're so vilified and so stigmatized, where if used appropriately, they could be these really powerful tools for healing and for transformation.
yeah, absolutely. And kind of just thinking that those are medicines that have been used for, hundreds and thousands of years, and really been such a big part of so many cultures, and parts of initiation and transitions and healing and transformation, and that psychedelics, but just non-ordinary states in general, and
Hmm.
that it just been in the last few hundred years that we've kind of moved away from it, and now going through this scientific way and research to be able to show its effectiveness. And so for me, it's really exciting to see that this is happening, because I come from the
Mm.
Czech Republic, and sorry, you're going to say something.
Oh no, please continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say that kind of grew up with Stan Grof, who um, was a psychiatrist who studied non-ordinary state. He worked with LSD, so he did a lot of work on LSD psychotherapy, and then developed holotropic breath work and worked with non-ordinary states. And I think it's a lot of the things that he has written and said and shared are still just like sinking in, and people are kind of starting to really open their mind to. And so that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's the danger of being ahead of your time, which I think that in many ways Stan Grof has been. And from what I've heard, like my father, who's a psychologist and who did your training, which is really cool, has told me about the like kind of very slow glacial progression of things in the field of psychology, that they don't really like to change established ways of doing things. It takes a lot for things to make progress. And I think that what Stan Grof has been recommending through his research is to really radically reorient a lot of aspects of psychology that people that are more indoctrinated in a particular way of thinking about things are really resistant to. And it's interesting because the psychology and our ideas about psychology, it bleeds out to a lot of other aspects of culture. So I think that that's why also visionary art and art that's also influenced by these altered states of consciousness is quite underground, because the culture hasn't really caught up to a place of being able to acknowledge these non-ordinary states of consciousness as being valuable. And so they don't value the art that is influenced by it. But I'm curious to ask you, I think it's important to acknowledge the effectiveness of non-ordinary states of consciousness in general, not only those induced by psychedelics or medicines or chemicals. And there's been a persecution against altered states of consciousness that has occurred on and off throughout history for a very long time. And I'm curious why you think there's so much fear around altered states of consciousness. And also, from your research, how do you feel that altered states of consciousness are valuable in healing for people?
Yeah, those are great questions, Jake. And it's interesting because the change has happened. There was a time when these states were really valued and celebrated. And in a lot of indigenous cultures, people who enter into these spontaneous states of consciousness, they oftentimes become the shamans, the leaders, the people who others come for help and support and healing and transformation. And that at certain point, kind of with the evolution, and that these states became not valid, and as you're saying, persecuted, and people were labeled. Like a lot of people can be labeled with be having like schizophrenia or psychotic disorders or manic disorders, just as many of them being in a state of more openness and non-ordinary state of consciousness. And that it's kind of interesting that sometimes people who are labeled with these disorders really have these greater insights in nature of our being, in the world, in knowing, and have these kind of complex systems and insights to a lot of things in the past, and they're labeled as crazy or as that they need medication. So it really doesn't make sense to me. But I think there has to be really like revisioning and rethinking the way how we look at mental health and mental disorders and the healing itself, as we incorporate thinking about a non-ordinary states of consciousness. And that has these greater implications of how we look at spirituality, and that it's not a religion but just a spirituality, and how we relate to being in the world and with each other. So that it has a huge implications as we are bringing that in. And I think there are more and more people who want to see change, who see how the way we have been living is not supportive for our planet, for each other, how we're more alienated from one another and the community. So I think that's where is the healing potential of these states of, from personal healing to collective, cultural, and greater in our relationship to the earth and to environment. So
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
as you said, mm-hmm.
Oh, well, just a comment on, I was saying that I think it's like a cultural thing, because our culture, Western culture, seems to really value productivity and kind of the mastery of material things as kind of its only objective. But you said that you lived in Bali for a time, and I live here, and here they have a completely different orientation towards the world that's a lot more multidimensional. Like their daily lives are enriched with experiences of connecting with spirits and things like that all the time. And that's everybody. Everybody does ceremony every single day to connect with ancestors and spirits. So they don't just see material reality as being all there is. Like they are in touch with another dimension of reality as it exists on the kind of spiritual plane or astral plane or whatever you want to call it. And their whole culture is based around that. But in kind of postmodern, materialistic Western culture, it seems that there's a total denial of all other realms of existence, because it's not seen as having it's not seen as having practicality. It's not seen as being productive towards meeting the end goals and values of the culture, which is just to basically be productive in a kind of material sense. But this creates this great amount of it creates a lack within people, because I think that there is a natural yearning for connection with these other dimensions and an enrichment of the inner states of being that our culture doesn't really provide for people. And I'm sure you and I would both agree that psychedelics can be a gateway into those kind of inner realms and can help to enrich and make that connection.
Yeah, and it's kind of like not being open or acknowledging these other realms of consciousness. It's like really we're in this like just tiny part of this huge like reality, and then we are like seeing in this little part and believing that this is the reality, this is all there is. So it's kind of like not really seeing the picture in what you're describing, like in Bali, that people are more connected to some of these other realms or other dimensions of our reality. And so these medicines, and in non-ordinary states, if it's through medicine, psychedelics, or through other ways of, if it's a breathing, if it's fasting, if it's dancing or drumming, like through these states open us to remembering like, oh, there are these other states, this is much more than what we live. And how do we integrate that in today's society? And what you're saying, there is this focus on productivity and material, and a lot of these kind of beliefs or talks are thought about like they're not educated, or they're like primitive culture, or ways of how Western society doesn't see that. And I think there is now this time of bigger opening to that, and so it's we talk about it a lot when we provide a ketamine assisted psychotherapy, where people have these at times spiritual experiences or connecting with these other realms, or people can describe it as past lives or future lives, mystical, mythological, or archetypal experiences, or encounters with other beings or non-terrestrial beings, and they have to kind of integrate it to what they've believed or their life. And and that it takes time, that it's something what sometimes people just want to kind of leave behind because it feels like too overwhelming to suddenly kind of see that there is, not a little bit more, just so much more, that there is just different map of the consciousness and of the psyche. But as well, it can be, so liberating and life-changing to be able to see that. And I think the goal is to, be in both, to like see that, have that connection, and be as embodied as we can in this life here, to, that to be connected to whatever we find our purpose is and our connection. And so that working with these non-ordinary states, I think, has that potential to support us to understand this greater nature of reality and being more fully alive and present here.
Yeah, I guess that's where the integration work comes in, and that's I guess from the recreational use of psychedelics, that's one of the dangers, is that people do often go very deep into these non-ordinary states of consciousness, and they have all kinds of experiences, but they don't really do much to integrate them into their the third dimension. And they just kind of hang out in the higher dimensions without really doing any work to take those insights and create something here that's based off of them, which I think is equally as important. But yeah, something I wanted to mention is that I think that a lot of cultures that are really connected with these spiritual dimensions might kind of look at Western culture almost like we're living in black and white. Like there's just so much more. There's just a much richer way to experience life and reality, which psychedelics can open the doors to, but I don't think most people in Bali, for example, use psychedelics. They're just kind of naturally connected to this stuff. So it is definitely possible to have these experiences and to feel these sense of connection without necessarily using psychedelics. And I think actually it is kind of our natural state of being as well. And it's something that is kind of trained out of us, because I remember when I was a little kid, when I, some of my early memories as a child, I would have a lot of experiences of, you could call them, imagination experiences, but like kids have, imaginary friends, or, I used to play around with my sister when I was a little kid, and we would pretend, or we would, it was pretend, but we were having like a real kind of virtual reality experience of like playing with fairies or whatever it was. And that's kind of the world in which children live in. And I think that that's who we are in our essence, and we have the possibility to live like that all the time. But if you are indoctrinated in and you grow up within Western culture, then that's kind of, you're taught that that's not appropriate, that is kind of foolish, or it's not adult to have those kinds of sentiments or inclinations, and especially if you grow up in a culture that really values the sciences, then you're kind of shamed in entertaining beliefs of spiritual realities, or there being things that we can't perceive with our senses. And I think that it's kind of a return back to our natural state in a way, because I think that human beings in general have this inclination towards being able, it's kind of like a superpower that humans have, to be able to work with the imagination and work with the mind in such a way that we can see and perceive things that aren't in material existence. And psychedelics can be a tool that can help us to open up to that.
Yeah. So you're kind of saying it's like almost like that we've been disconnected, that in this world there is like a disconnection from our true self. And how can we like, there are ways how we can get back in touch with that, and it's through practices, like whatever we're just putting attention to is developing. And so a lot of people probably have experienced, just if we start to meditate or start to notice energy fields, or start to notice just reconnecting with nature and plants. I think that's so powerful. I was, talking to a woman once and who worked with a lot of plant medicines, and she said, say hello to every plant you meet in a day. Like, everywhere you walk on the street, say hello. And, you kind of like greet every tree, every plant you see. And then after a while, you start hearing them talking back to you. You start to reconnect, and there is this like a two-way communication that suddenly is there. And so what you're saying, when the people practice these different ways of connecting with other realms or spirits or live in ceremony, they're much more open and aligned with their true nature than if we are kind of pushed to suppress what, as kids, what we're noticing or feeling, and kind of being, just changed by kind of like stopping listening even to what is happening in our bodies, and to do things what are expected from us in our culture. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. I don't think it's like having these experiences is something extra special. I think it's something that we are born with, and then, like you said, we get disconnected from because we're trained out of it, and then we suppress this. I think there's a lot of suppression of the spiritual instincts within Western culture. And I like what you're saying also about having that connection with the plants. And something that I've learned or observed from Balinese culture is that they relate to everything as if it has an intelligence, so they are constantly doing prayers of gratitude for anything, like their motorbike, for their home, for their refrigerator, whatever it is, which is kind of a more extreme version of that. But it's kind of like if you relate to everything as if it has a spirit, as if there's some sense of intelligence within it. And if you orient yourself in the world that way, then I guess life becomes a lot more alive, because we're not just these kind of alienated things. We're enmeshed in a world that is full of life,
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Kind of really like bringing more, awareness and presence. Because I think a lot of times we can, if we don't pay attention and don't acknowledge, is in a way like you're describing it, it feels like really truly being present and noticing. Because I think, where we live in the cities, it's like you kind of dissociate from the moment. There are a lot of times people live in thinking what they have to do, what happened, where to get from one place to another, and really it's not even noticing what's happening in the moment in front of you. And and then not being connected to ourselves, and that it can be practiced through presence and acknowledging, and paying attention. And I think kind of when you talk about all these different things and non-ordinary states, I was thinking as well about dreams. Like I had like such a vivid dreams as a kid, and lucid dreaming, when I would like wake up and knew I was dreaming and was experiencing these realities in dreams. And if I pay attention and I start writing it down, and so that it's like a practice, and so it becomes more and more available. And then if I get busy with my life and preparing things and planning and get disconnected, as well can see how that kind of starts to shut down and becomes less available. So I think it's really true to all these dimensions. How can we slow down and cultivate presence and appreciation and opening up again? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in regards to dreams, even in Western culture, there have, like the great minds of psychology, Carl Jung and Freud, were both obsessed with dreams and consider there to be great value found in them. And in other cultures, like in Tibet, I've heard that a lot of the more advanced stage practices of Tibetan Buddhism involve dream work, lucid dreaming, where people will actually go into certain places in their dreams and have encounters with masters who have passed on, but they can still interface with them in dream reality and receive teachings from them. And it's really, really fascinating. And it's far beyond the kind of expanse of where the boundaries are drawn around reality, which is quite narrow within Western culture. And dreams have always fascinated me, and I've always been interested in work around lucid dreaming and things like that as well. I wanted to kind of pull back a little bit and talk to you about what you're doing with Polaris. So can you tell us a bit about Polaris and what it is and what kind of work you're doing?
Yeah, so we are a ketamine assisted psychotherapy clinic in San Francisco. And we started as I was in the MDMA assisted therapy training with 5 of my colleagues. We got together and became really good friends and decided to start Polaris and bring the protocol that we've learned to work with MDMA, but as well, which was already familiar to us from holotropic breathwork, because it was really greatly based on the work of Stan Grof, into working with ketamine. And we had 2 of our colleagues, Phil Wolfson and Julian Andrews, that have been already doing this work. And so they're kind of inspiration to us and to starting our clinic. And so we've been providing ketamine assisted psychotherapy for people for treatment of depression, anxiety, trauma, and some other mental health challenges. And we as well started providing trainings for clinicians who are interested in becoming ketamine assisted psychotherapists. So that has been, really wonderful to do, because we can see as well over the last 3 years, the way how we work has developed. So we are always learning and always finding the best ways how to work with the medicines. And the way we work, we really hold it as an extraordinary experience, and hold it in the context of the ceremony, and bring different ceremonial aspects which come from different lineages that each of us studied with or were brought up with, and so bringing that into the work with the medicine. And so it's really bridging this medicinal field of this psychopharmacological and neurobiological effect of the medicine ketamine with the psychotherapy and the ceremonial kind of shamanic tradition together. So it's kind of bringing together these 3 different paradigms in our work. And we provide as well online sessions now, and we do individual and group therapy sessions. So it's it's been really interesting to see that it is possible to do this work virtually and to work with people and support our clients online during this time as well.
So how are you doing the work online? Are you still using ketamine for those virtual sessions? And so are those people that receive ketamine through some kind of prescription then?
Yeah, so when we were able, until March, working in our office, so we were working with two routes of administration. So one was with injections, injectable ketamine, and with lozenges, which are like pills, lozenges that people hold in their mouths, and the medicine absorbed through their mouths. And now, when we move to online, we continue to work with the lozenges. We work only with people in California because that's where our medical directors, that's his license in California. And so does, online intake with the psychiatrist, with the psychologist. And then the medicine is prescribed to the person and shipped from the pharmacy to their home. And then they do the sessions with us over Zoom. So we stay with the persons throughout the whole session, and we have a music playlist that they play, during the session. They the setting is kind of people are lying down or their couch or in their bed. They're wearing eye shades, and we start with kind of a preparation and intention setting. So we talk about, the specific intention for the journey, and then they take the medicine, and we guide them through like a relaxation or meditation, and bring an invocation for the journey, and have the music playing, and then we sit with the person throughout the whole experience. And for those of people who are not familiar with ketamine is classified as this dissociative anesthetic, but it has psychedelic properties. And so depending on the dosage, there are different ways how people respond to the medicine. And so in the lower doses, it's more like a psycholytic, heart opening space where the clients connect with us more. So they're still, inside with the eye shades, but there is more interaction with us. And sometimes they're, processing some past memories or sharing about things that are coming up for them. And then when they use the moderate to higher doses of the medicine, there is a part of the journey that's more internal. When the medicine kind of starts working there with the music, and we are holding space in case something difficult comes up or that we can support them. And then as the medicine starts to wear off, that's where we do more of the talking, when they share about the journey, what they experienced, what came up for them. And that's kind of the start of the integration process. And then, we meet for another integration session or have contact over phone after that session. So, the nice thing, what has been, surprising for me, that for some people it actually works better in their own home, because they're able to feel more vulnerable, and they feel comfortable, in their bed, in their space, and they're still supported by our presence. And then they don't have to go anywhere after the session. So I think that was kind of a hard time in the office, that, in the end of the session, kind of, people have time for recovery, but then they have to travel home. And in these sessions, they're, already at home, so they don't have to go anywhere. And so, this work with ketamine is, been really possible for many of the people that we've worked with virtually.
I'm curious about the orientation towards ketamine as opposed to other psychedelics. Is it primarily because of the legal aspects of it? Because right now you can't legally work with other psychedelics or MDMA, but you can work with ketamine because it's available as a legal medicine.
Yeah, so that is correct. So, the reason why we started Polaris to work with ketamine was that it is something that is legally prescribable in the US and, many countries in Europe. So it is a medicine that's been discovered in 1962 for anesthesia. But because of the psychedelic effects, they would use it for a surgery. It's very, very safe, so it doesn't suppress breathing. And then, when people would come out, they would have these psychedelic experiences, and they would share these things they experienced, which was, sometimes fascinating, sometimes frightening, but it wasn't something what the doctor wanted to have in a recovery room after a surgery. And so
Right.
they, when they use it in hospitals, they use it together now with benzodiazepines or other medicines that will cause kind of, decrease the memory of the experience. But, that became the interest for the psychologists and psychiatrists to, working with this medicine. And so it has, really specific properties and is different than, MDMA and psilocybin, but, and so we work with it because it's legally prescribable, so people can have prescription for it. The MDMA, I work with MDMA in the clinical trial, so that, right now we've, some places they continue the trials. It really depended on, where we are located. So we've had a break in San Francisco during the shelter in place, but that's something that we haven't been doing online. And yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I've had experiences with high doses of ketamine that have been incredibly powerful, and it's certainly, if used in a high dose, one of the most powerful psychedelics that exists, and the experiences can be incredibly alien and very strange. Something that I have found with ketamine, though, is just seeing its prevalence of use in a kind of more recreational context. It seems to have a higher potential for abuse than other psychedelics, and can also have quite a negative effect on people's lives, where I don't see that as much with, say, LSD or the more classic psychedelics, even if they're used frequently by people in a recreational context. But it seems that ketamine has a higher potential for addiction, and can also, if used too frequently, cause physical harm in some cases. Like, I know people that have had damaging effects on their bladders with it, and also have had kind of just a sort of delusion that can seem to occur in people's minds that seems more pronounced with the use of ketamine as opposed to other substances. And I was wondering if you cared to comment at all about sort of the dark side of ketamine, which I've observed, and if that's come up at all for you in your research with it.
Yeah, and it's, so I think like anything can be misused or abused. And what you're, saying is really true, that there is much more cases of people who are recreationally abusing ketamine compared to, psilocybin or LSD, that we don't really hear about that.
Right.
There can be some, people might use those medicine in the, kind of like spiritual bypass, but not in the same kind of addictive way as could happen with ketamine. And I think it's, there are two probably, things. One is that there is this dissociative quality of it. And so sometimes it, what we've met people who came to us who have, misused ketamine to kind of avoid working on something or dealing or feeling. And so that they came and wanted to, change their relationship with the medicine and to actually look at what was happening, for them internally. And then the other part is that for some people, there can be really fascinating experiences, and there is like a really big draw to be in this other state and to connecting to these other realities. And so, like Dr. Lilly is a great example, because he used ketamine for a few years of his life. It's not many people know who read about him that he actually stopped completely using ketamine, and for the last 30 years of his life he hasn't used ketamine. But he has, contributed to the field and to understanding as well of non-ordinary states, and shared his stories with ketamine and his ketamine trips. But it was in a way that there were times when it was really misused and used in, and called like a addiction, or ways where he put himself in, dangerous situations. So it is, but we haven't seen that in the context of the way how we work with the medicine. And I think it is really the way how we hold it as a sacred experience, as a sacred medicine, and we encourage people to really prepare for the sessions and work with it in a context of greater healing and transformation. And, as well with working with the lozenges or the injection with the doctor, it, we have not seen it in our patients. The other two things, what you mentioned, there is the possibility of the physical damage with the bladder, the cystitis is one of the issues. There as well has been shown a toxicity, neurotoxicity for people using it on a daily basis. So there are dangers if it is used in an excessive way. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's just important to understand the dangers, and then to create situations where those dangers are mitigated or reduced, which I think if you're using it in a more sacred context is it's markedly reduced in terms of its harmful effects. I was also curious because I've heard about ketamine therapy for treating depression, but I'm not really sure how that works. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how people use ketamine to treat depression. And I'm also curious, what kinds of dose ranges do you use when you're working with patients to treat depression? Do people have full ego obliteration, kind of what people call K-hole experiences, and is that effective for treating depression, or do you tend to work with lighter doses just to open people up for a deeper conversation?
Yeah, so thanks for asking, Jake. It's so, how it works. So I think it works on, several different levels. So then one is the neurobiochemical level, where ketamine increases as well neuroplasticity. It increases the communication between the cells in the brain. So we have something called pyramid cells. And people who are depressed, it's almost like these cells stop communicating. And then as the ketamine comes in, these cells start to communicate and create new neural pathways. And the research has shown that, maybe in one session, people feel this kind of an uplift, and not always, but sometimes they need to do like a 2, 3, and in average 4 to 6 sessions for these kind of cells and these new neural pathways being created and sustained. And so that, people come for a series of sessions. And then there is that, so there is ketamine treatment and ketamine assisted psychotherapy. So most of the places, if you look, online, you will find ketamine treatment, which is oftentimes done in IV clinics where they put a drip, for people. A lot of these clinics are owned by anesthesiology doctors, and they're really using the ketamine as a medicine, like the medication, and it helps. It has an antidepressant effect. But in the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, we are really wanting things to come up. We are looking for what is underneath and help people heal what is causing the depression or heal the underlying trauma. So the medicine helps to bring the non-ordinary state where the material comes up, and we are working, with that. As well, the person, who is working with us, they are in outside therapy where they continue their, other work. So as I was mentioning, kind of the treatments done in a context of overall healing. So, it might be that they're, changing their habits, they're, processing their trauma. Like I worked with someone who, had trauma that she wasn't even able to talk about what happened, and it would come up in the ketamine sessions, but we wouldn't completely process what happened, but it allowed her to then go to her therapist and talk about it and continue processing. And that processing took, but it was as in the context of this of this whole treatment, and we believe there is something called the inner healing intelligence that ketamine, but non-ordinary states are almost like this compass that's awakened, this our innate ability to heal. And so it brings up whatever we need to look at. So whatever the person needs to look at, whatever needs to be addressed, comes up. And sometimes it comes up right in the session, and sometimes it comes in the time after the session, in the time of the integration. And so the state is supporting this healing and transformation. When you're asking me about the dosage and that we work with, and if people use these high doses, or like what somebody say, like a K-hole. So I always think about, like, to demystify the K-hole when people are like, what is the K-hole, and have I been to the K-hole, and sometimes people are like, oh, I'm worried, I don't want to go to the K-hole, like whatever we do, and we're like, well, let's talk about what that means. And So we work with different dosages. And when people come in, we start working with them with a low dose. So it's really kind of a dose where it's more that empathogenic, like open-hearted space. But then we kind of go higher to the moderate doses where people have out-of-body experience. And then, in the even higher dose, there is the, either what people oftentimes describes like a near to death-like experience or the ego dissolution experience. And we want people to feel comfortable as they're working with us, as they're trusting us, they're trusting the medicine. But these states in the higher doses can be, really transformative. And there are people who just by experiencing something, greater than themselves, that itself helps with the healing and transformation. And so Eli Kolb, which is another, researcher and therapist with ketamine, psychiatrist for many years, he's written that, in that out-of-body experience, people like don't identify anymore as a body, but I start to identify with the mind or kind of the thinking consciousness. And then near to death experience, they feel like they identify with the soul, like being the soul of themselves. And then in the ego dissolution, it's, identification with the creator, like I am God, I am, everything. And so we do work with these higher doses with clients as well.
I see. Yeah, I can imagine that if somebody's never experienced any kind of altered state before, to jump right into those high doses could be very, very frightening for people. So it makes sense to kind of ramp up gently if people are, to try to be sensitive to people's comfort levels around how deep they want to go. But I agree. I think that it can be incredibly healing to get to a point where you are only consciousness, and it can give one the realization, if you get to a point of ego dissolution, that the consciousness is something eternal, that even if you are without identity, or even if you are without a body or a mind, so to speak, that there's still something there that's ever present and witnessing. And that can be a really, really liberating experience to have. And certainly high doses of ketamine can provoke such an experience. It's funny that I think that it's kind of like how people say, like, I took mushrooms at Disneyland and had a bad time, or whatever. Like, a lot of people might accidentally take a high dose of ketamine, like on the dance floor at a club, and then they have these crazy out of body experiences, and they're like, that was awful. But if you do it in the right context, which you're providing to do that in a safe environment under supervision, etc., then it can be really profound. And it just adds credibility to the fact that all psychedelic medicines really need to be worked with in their appropriate context in order to get benefit from them. And that if you're doing it carelessly or unwisely, that it can have negative effects. And I just want to warn you that we have only about maybe 5 minutes left, but this has been a really excellent conversation. If there's anything you care to comment on before we go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jake. Yeah, just kind of, what you were saying, it's definitely the setting of these experiences is so important. And like a lot of, we sing a lot about the preparation for these experiences and integration, and then they can have these really beautiful transformative ways. And I think music is such a big part, and art, and kind of like finding ways how we can continue to open and reconnect with ourselves, our true nature, and these greater realms will help us to as well connect more with each other. And that's kind of, I think, what our hope is, to work with this medicine to and in the future, hopefully with other medicines as they become rescheduled and we can work with them. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the work that you're doing, and it's fascinating and inspiring. And I agree. I think the soul craves expansion, and that these medicines are really helping us to open up to wider and wider vistas of what reality is, and to broaden our concepts of self, which is, I think, what the world really needs right now. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing with Polaris and to help further the psychedelic mission. And thank you so much for coming on this chat today. And thank you, everybody who's been listening to this as well.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to see you, Jake. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, great to see you too.
Yeah.
All right. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Gold.